take us back to coming back and forth to Portugal. I mean, we've seen Portugal change. I mean, I've been here since 2009, so you've got a lot longer experience with the country than what I do.
Mm.
What did you enjoy back then about coming back and forth between Portugal? How did you enjoy the experience of Portugal back then?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it hasn't changed very much. Although, to be fair,
Okay.
I now live in Lisbon, visit Estremoz when I was down in the Algarve, and I think the Algarve is already quite well developed for tourism and remains so. Um, I suppose the quality of places, the sort of five-star experience, is more prevalent down in the Algarve than it was. So that's changed. But otherwise, it's pretty similar. And I think Portugal's always been this wonderful mix of first and third world, hasn't it?
Yeah.
You get out of the mainstream and up in the hills, and and in the Alentejo in particular, you still see farmers leading donkeys down the streets, moving
Yeah.
stuff around.
That's the traffic in the Alentejo.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's delightful. And I think Portugal always was and remains, it's got, we must remember it was one of the richest nations on the planet, wasn't it? Back when they were traveling the world and
Yeah.
had an empire. And the legacy of that still remains, where this huge wealth was used to create fantastic buildings and build towns and all sorts of things like that. And all of that stuff is there. And since then, I suppose, um, there hasn't been a lot of redevelopment because they haven't had the money. So it's remained untouched, which is great. Um,
Yeah.
and, we say to people, if I'm asked how would I describe Portugal, I said it's got great wine, great food, great beaches, great climate, great culture. The people are very nice. And everything really is almost the perfect lifestyle here. And but perhaps better if you're retired and don't need to get on and do business because that can be frustrating. And I think nobody who's lived here or even the Portuguese nationals would argue that this place does not work very efficiently on a business front, and things which could take a short time take a very long time and sometimes a huge amount of time, and that can be frustrating. And I think I'm not trying to be unkind at all to my adopted home, but I don't think anybody would argue any different. Not even the most fervent Portugal supporter would suggest that that isn't true. And it
Yeah.
was a shock to some degree. Not if you come from Hong Kong, where things happen instantaneously. I don't think there's a faster social or business environment in the world, and then you're coming to one of the really, really rather slow ones. And I was already familiar with this, but I suppose I hadn't dealt with it to the same extent. So
Hmm.
it still becomes frustrating just trying to get things to happen. And part of it's the system doesn't really cater for it because ultimately everything has to go back to government and civil service. Whenever you need to do anything, you need licenses and paperwork, and that can be slow. And maybe partly because the population's got used to it and therefore has
Hmm.
adopted some of the rather laissez-faire attitudes to it on the basis there's no point trying to do anything about it because you can't, which exacerbates the problem. I think that's my feeling anyway. And you are restricted by the infrastructure, but also we find that after a while, maybe everybody slips into the same sort of
Gotcha.
gentle siesta type mentality,
Yeah.
which exacerbates the problem. I mean,
Yeah. I
we
mean,
have a little joke we say about the Spaniard talking to the Portuguese, and he says, is there anything in the Portuguese language the equivalent to our manana? And the Portuguese thinks about it a while and then says, well, nothing which conveys quite that same sense of urgency.
yeah.